Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about main type of macronutrient. A huge one is called carbohydrates, right? One of the top three, your body's preferred source of energy. So let's dive right into it. So we're going to talk about the two types of carbohydrates there are. First type is obviously the simple one, right? You have sugar, honey, basically anything that's not too refined, not too processed at all. So basically that's sugars. So we're talking about dextrose, mainly found in vegetables. Sucrose is table sugar. Fructose, mainly found in fruits. Also in sodas, high fructose corn syrup is fructose, and another one. And they all really break down to glucose in the bloodstream, and that's the core part of it. Then there's lactose, which is milk sugar. The other type, of course, is complex carbohydrates, and that's stuff that's less refined. It's slower to digest, which we'll get into soon. So fiber is a type of complex carbohydrate, and starch is a bunch of polysaccharides, which are sugars linked together to make them more complex structures, basically. So fiber is good and important for cholesterol control. Helps control LDL, low density lipoprotein. That's the bad cholesterol component. That's why you want to stick to mainly complex carbohydrates over simple carbohydrates. But rather, simple carbohydrates still have their place. Just depends on your activity level and diet that you're on. Another benefit of complex carbohydrates is they do provide more nutrients generally, more vitamins in them. Like brown rice would have more vitamins than like white rice would. Same with whole wheat bread, etc. So some examples of complex carbohydrates right there. So just think of them as having more fiber in general, slower to digest because of that, and just more complexity, greater chains of these monosaccharides, so they're more complex. Okay, so let's talk about glycemic index. This is key to understanding how our body really processes these carbohydrates. So what is the glycemic index? You can see here is basically the rate of blood glucose release in the bloodstream that your body will digest the sugar minutes after intake. So we can really divide carbohydrates into high GI carbs and low GI carbs. So when we talk about a high GI carb, we talk about something that's going to impact our blood glucose level like really fast and really greatly, and cause a huge spike in insulin. So that would be the simple sugars, right? And versus a low GI carb, we're going to talk about something that would be slower to release the blood glucose, slower to digest because of that, and that would be the complex carbs. So in general, the sugars, the high GI carbs, you want to avoid those. There's really no place for those in a fat loss plan at all. Now, if you're a advanced athlete, they definitely have their place after a strenuous workout to spike that insulin. But this is time and a place for that. Once again, fast release in the bloodstream of the sugars, they cause a huge spike in insulin versus a little trickle like the complex carbs would do. Yeah, so complex carbs, low GI, they're generally better for you because of that slower release. Your body can tolerate glucose, but it does not like huge releases of glucose like that in the bloodstream. It has to somehow take care of it, and it does that through releasing insulin. And insulin is going to store it in either muscle glycogen or fat, which we'll talk about soon. So release, and yeah, so you want to get that trickle stream of insulin. So let's talk about vegetables and fruits. Yes, they are carbs, mainly dextrose, fiber. Obviously plenty of nutrients in them. Fructose as well in fruits. Definitely have their place in a diet. Mainly stick to vegetables in a weight loss plan. Fruits have their place, but they are digested differently. They don't cause spikes in insulin. That fructose does not cause spikes in insulin like glucose does, and it just is metabolized in the liver. So it's a bit different route, but it can still cause weight gain. Not to say fruits are bad. Definitely have nutrients that other simple carbs might not. Yeah, so low GI for that reason. They're low GI because of that. Because they're not metabolized like glucose is. Yeah, they cause a low response to insulin and leptin as well. We'll talk about what leptin is in the hormones presentation. But leptin is basically your fat cells produce it to give the brain a signal that your body's no longer hungry, basically. So low response for leptin and insulin is a good thing. A high response for them would be, a worse thing. So still eat them in moderation, though. High fructose corn syrup, that's what HFCS stands for. Avoid that at all costs. It's mainly in America, we use it in our soft drinks. It's much sweeter than sugar. I don't know why we use it, but if you're going to drink a soft drink, pick one with real cane sugar in it, not high fructose corn syrup, because high fructose corn syrup can't even be digested normally as glucose can. It has to go through the liver, and it gets stored in there as fatty tissue in the liver, which is just the worst thing. and it will cause cravings for other carbs as well. So now we get to starchy versus fibrous vegetables. So starchy vegetables are obviously more energy dense because they're greater chains of those polysaccharides. So they're going to cause a higher insulin response because they just have that much more carbs in them. Versus fibrous vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, they're going to cause a lower insulin response because they're mostly just fiber, and they're good for you to help balance your digestion, control that, and like I said, the cholesterol control as well. Examples of starchy vegetables would be potatoes, sweet potatoes, etc. They definitely have their place in a meal plan, depending on your activity level. But for the most part, for a weight loss plan, you want fibrous vegetables. Pretty much in all meals, I'd recommend a good rule of thumb is 4 ounces, which is a handful, with all your meals. That's something I write in your meal plans. Not are carbs actually essential? So they're actually not. Carbs are the only non-essential macronutrients. You cannot live without proteins and fats in your diet. However, you can definitely live without carbs in your diet. In fact, for many years, humans have lived without carbs in their diet because we didn't always grow wheat. We didn't always have access to growing rice. But people did kill animals and yeah. Anyway, so but how is that possible? Because you think you need carbs to you bring need carbs to function. You got to use glucose as fuel, right? Well, it's possible because your body can actually use fat for fuel. In that there's a process called gluconeogenesis that I'll get into in a little bit that can actually make carbs from amino acids and triglycerides, fatty acids. So what is ketosis really? Ketosis is pretty important. It's basically a term for low or no carb diets. It works really well for overweight clients because you're really priming your body to with that low carbs. You're really priming your body to use primarily fat for fuel because that is no other option. Um, the premise is the main macronutrient that you're consuming in for the majority of your diet is going to be the one your body's going to use for fuel. Now, even though it's going to use glucose, to directly fuel your brain and your muscles, that's true. It's going to make glucose from the other macronutrients if it needs to, which it will. So in that way, ketosis works amazingly well. That's why some of you might see maybe your a fat percentage for your meal plans is like 40-50%. You might be thinking that's a lot of fat. Yeah, but the carbs are very, very low. And that's for a good reason. You get rapid weight loss results doing that because you're literally telling your body, hey, use fat for fuel once you stop eating, you can use your body fat for fuel. It's an easy switch. So once again, carbs are really something we can manipulate, and that's the key here. We can manipulate them based on our activity level and goals. So say you have a high activity level, and your goal is to gain, a lot of muscle mass. You're gonna do well on higher carbs for sure and lower fat. So you don't want to mix high carb and high fat at the same time in a diet because that's just the worst thing. You're giving your body two different fuels that it likes both of them, but it's just gonna store them one as fat and just prefer one. It's gonna prefer carbs in that case, but you're gonna get a huge spillover effect. It's gonna store a lot of them as fat. So, for a weight loss plan, we can manipulate carbs lower and use primarily fat for fuel. And that's an easy way to, in general, manipulate your weight, just change the carbs up. So carbs aren't the enemy. They're just a tool in our arsenal to either gain weight, lose weight, and just, change our nutrition like that. Really, timing of them is key because I showed you the insulin spikes, which I'll discuss more in detail. When you time them improperly, it's going to sabotage your results and all your effort in the gym. But however, if you time it correctly, like after a workout, you spike your insulin, it goes in the muscle glycogen. It's a good thing because insulin is an anabolic hormone. It's going to help your results actually. So timing is really key as well as the amount of carbs in your diet. So I think I mentioned this earlier. Gluconeogenesis is basically your body can make glucose from fatty acids and amino acids. It's like biochemistry. You learn about this reaction and how that's done. So let's talk about the effects of carbohydrate consumption. What happens in your body when you're eating carbohydrates? So you eat carbohydrates, you make blood glucose, right? You digest the carbs, simple or complex. Either way, you digest them, and those polysaccharides get broken down into glucose, which is the ultimate monosaccharide, and it's going to be your body's main form of energy production, right? And so you're either going to use it directly if you're being active right then and there. You're going to use it in your muscle action. Your muscles are going to use the glucose. Otherwise, if you're not being active and you have all this blood glucose in your bloodstream, you're just sitting there at your desk job or something, your pancreas is going to produce insulin. It has to. The reason is insulin's going to go out and get that glucose and either put it in one of two places. It's going in the muscle glycogen if the glycogen's empty, or it's going in the adipose tissue, fat tissue, if the glycogen's full. That's what we call the spillover effect. So the idea really here is to minimize the amount of glucose, the amount of carbs we're putting in our fat tissue, right? To have it always go into muscle glycogen. But how can we do that? We do that through timing it. We do that through timing it correctly by making sure we're taking most of our carbs after a workout when our glycogen's empty or after a fasted state. Because if we do the opposite, if we take it at a time, like for breakfast, let's say, when you haven't really been active at all, or like randomly at lunch, you just take a bunch of carbs, you can notice you're gonna get sleepy, you're gonna spike your insulin, your fat storage is gonna increase because your glycogen's full. It's gonna go in the fat tissue. All those carbs are getting stored straight as fat. You're not going to be burning in a fat burning zone. That's the premise behind insulin. So how can we substitute sugar in a weight loss plan? This is real good key here, because a lot of people rely on artificial sweeteners. A couple of them are aspartame, saccharin, this one right here. Sucralose is a big one too. And they can be really hard to avoid, but they're problematic because they've been found to increase cravings in general of sweet foods, because obviously they taste sweet. They're a lot sweeter than sugar per like molecular weight. So they're going to increase cravings for the same taste. But also sucralose has been found to actually cause a higher insulin response when you actually take real carbs in. So that's not what you want. You want a lower insulin response. A high insulin response is called insulin resistance. It's kind of like on the road to being diabetic. So it's not what you want. What's a better way to substitute those artificial sweeteners? Well, two things are xylitol. It's a sugar alcohol, and there's some other sugar alcohols out there. Xylitol's a pretty popular one. Yeah, it's pretty common in gum. For good reason too, because it actually can literally rebuild tooth enamel. You can see that kind of here. It helps kill plaque and mouth bacteria as well, and it tastes really sweet. It's pretty cool. Looks just like sugar. You can get it on Amazon. Pretty cheap. Otherwise, you can get stevia. I believe it tastes a bit different, but it's still sweet and it's natural. It's a plant. One thing about xylitol, it can, and all sugar alcohols, they can aggravate your digestion. So they'll upset your stomach basically if you take them on empty stomach and you take too much. Stevia though is pretty great, and I know Trader Joe's carries it here in Gainesville. So you can find it there. Here's an example. Like I said, it has 0 calories. So does xylitol. 0 calories, 0 carbs. Does not produce a glycemic response that's important. And it's not artificial. It's from a plant. So there's an idea of how to substitute sugar in your diet, how to manipulate carbs to support your goals instead of sabotaging your goals, and overview of what carbs are and their place in a proper diet.